Envious player Shox is without any question one of the greatest CS:GO players of all time. If you were to rank a top five of all time, I don't see any possible reason as to why he wouldn't be in everyone's top five. And beyond that, when we get into the realm of personal preference and what criteria we favour over others, I mean, for someone like me, I might have him in my top three. He had that level of impact during his peak and throughout the history of the game in terms of what he's been able to do and repeatedly getting back to being a great player and showing such skill year in and year out within the game. So he's absolutely one of the most skilled players of all time. He's one of the most successful of all time, actually, in CSGO now. If we think about skill, we can talk about his peak in late 2013 when he pretty much carried Very Games to the top of the mountain, made them the best team in the world. In terms of success, well, that Very Games team, it's forgotten because, okay, they only won a couple of events that had nip at them, but they won some other events as well. They won maybe 4, 5, 6 events overall in this time span of about 8 months, 6 to 8 months overall when they were the number one team and they established themselves. He was a big part of that. So the success levels there. Then he goes into the LDLC era, coming to Envy, where they've won a major. So he's added a major title to that. They won MLG over a lot of top competition. So this is a very successful player. And in Envy, they've never placed below top 4. They've had 9 top 4s in a row. And he's been one of the best players on their team, especially in the latter part of it. Earlier on, okay, other players were very good. And that was a team that was a lot more sort of, the skill level was distributed among the players in that team, as opposed to Very Games, where he really was one of the elite players who game in and game out had to perform for them. He's a player who commands the respect of every top pro. That's always very telling, okay? It's one thing if people like a pro because they like his personality. Other pros I'm talking about here, like they think he's funny or they get on with him very well. But actually, you'll notice it's only the really, really great players where every other player just almost by default just says, yep, he's amazing. Like, oh, he's so great. Like, I wish I could play with him. Hate playing against him. He's one of those maybe 5 players that they'll all really say that, and not just for the cameras, they'll say this in private as well, like, you know, he's absolutely incredible. I mean, I remember when I asked JW in my Reflections interview with him, I asked him just this question where I said, okay, in the early Fnatic, when you first got Pronax in late 2013, you played against Shox when he was at the top, when he was at his peak of skill, and you've played against him now when he's in NV, LDS, LDLC, when at the time LDLC, okay, they'd won DreamHack Winter, but that's it. They hadn't overall been winning that much, and crucially, Shox hadn't really been like the best player on their team. So all I asked him was like, contrast the two. And so as a way of answering me, he just told me a story about when they'd played LDLC, not LDLC, Very Games with Shox at MSI Beat It finals in China. And all he said was like, when I played that, I seem to remember that Shox just like aced us on like 3 pistol rounds or something. And that's like all he had to say. Like, he didn't have to explain more. And as he dropped on, all he essentially was doing was setting the stage for this is how good that guy was. And even if I was playing against him, it was like, holy fuck, this guy's incredible. Like, he can beat our whole team on his own. It has that sort of feel to him. Coming from a 1.6 background, one of the things that makes Shox so interesting to me is I never expected to see a player like this when we got like a shared game and all the talent in theory came over. Obviously not entirely, like some talent didn't transition well, some talent just retired entirely at the end of 1.6. But in terms of like all the best people who want to be a CS pro now are competing against each other, I didn't think we'd see a player like Shox. Because if you think of the other players who are running the game who come from Source, because I come from a 1.6 background, they come from Source. Okay, you've got Kenny S now, whose level is actually unbelievable. And I could do entire videos just about him, but he took longer to develop. It took about, he became in 2013, after his Very Games period when they kicked him out, he kind of got to that level where he was like a really good highlight player. Like, he's the player I'd watch if his team was playing, but I had no expectations that his play would win his team the game. I knew that his team wouldn't be good enough to support him to win the game, and therefore I would never thought he'd really get to like a godlike level. I always felt like he'd be held down by that and he'd just do the best he could, and would even be motivated beyond that. Now, he eventually did develop into a godlike player that he is right now, but it took him a long time. It took him maybe like a year and a half to get to that point. Guardian, another great Source AWPer. Yeah, there was all the hype around him from Source. In CSGO, though, he's never been a god. That's the thing. Guardian's never had that period where he puts together 10 maps in a row that are all godlike and he's just so incredible offline. He'll have the good map, he'll have the good half, he'll have a crazy round, but he's always very good when he's at his best. He's very rarely a god. He might have like the half where he's very, very good. But part of what makes you a god is not just to have the one half, just to have the one map. It's where you can string them together. Like they used to say in the NBA, okay, the thing about someone like Larry Bird or Michael Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain or Kobe Bryant in the modern era wasn't just that they could score 40 points or 50 points. This is like very few NBA players score 50 points. 40 points is a very good number. it's not just that they would do it, because there's other good players who'd have a really great night and score 40. The difference is they could do it for like 2 weeks in a row. They could have like 3 games in a row of 50. They could have 2 weeks where they scored 35 on a really good shooting percentage. It's the sheer frequency. It's that famous Aristotle quote, like excellence is something like excellence is a habit, is essentially what it says. It's like not an act, it's a habit, something along those lines. And so this is the notion here. The greatness comes from how often they do it. So likewise, okay, all these ex-Source pros, there never really was anything there where it's like, wow, that's utterly incredible. We've never seen anything like that coming from 1.6. In fact, most of the ex-Source pros, when they came over to CSGO and CSGO established and we've started to get a sense for who's good, you could either fit them into similar molds to other players we'd seen before in 1.6, or you could fit them into other molds with the other great players in CSGO. Like, okay, they play a similar sort of role here, and he's a bit like him in terms of an entry fragger, and this guy's kind of playing a lurking role like that. Okay, it all made sense. Everything made sense about it. You could look at it and go, that's predictable that you'd eventually have a player like this, and he'd make sense within this team, and I can understand why he's having this effect. Shox was something else. When he came along, it was something else. Because think about it, the greatest player for the first year and a half or so, in terms of just... Well, he never really dropped off. Shox got to his level, was Get Right. And Get Right was so far ahead of the competition in the early days, it was utterly insane. I mean, in the early days, a lot of pros had really big problems spraying the rifles, okay? They could burst a bit, they could tap a bit, they could short-range spray. But when it was that medium to slightly beyond medium spraying, there used to be real clips in the early days of CSGO, say the first 4 or 5 months, where players would both come along, crouch down, sprayed each other all their clip, and then neither would get the kill sometimes. This would really happen in top pro level games. Whereas Get Right was already able to full auto his whole clip and get these kills at like insane ranges, absolutely amazing ranges. And so he was already this level above everyone else. So you never thought actually that a player would get to his level, and especially not one of the former Source players. And then along came Shox, and he wasn't just very good, and then when he got into his team, he became better. He was good, and then when they got into a team very games that was based around him, now he became incredible. He had the chance to have the maximum game impact, and he did. And he had his game impact to a level that you couldn't compare anyone else to him in terms of his skills and the very specific style of play he'd play and where his strengths laid in the game. There was no one in the world comparable to him in those senses. Get Right had very different qualities that were making him a great player. And also, it was unique in that sense. I've actually have a theory that if you go through the greatest players in the history of Counter-Strike, so you go into 1.6 and you pick out all those names, Kogu, you're going to go Potty, let's go wherever you want, Element. The key thing that makes them interesting is, despite the fact you look at the game and a lot of players are similar, like I said about some of the Source players there, where they had a similar mold to this guy, or they reminded you of a player before, the greatest players, the truly all-time great players, have qualities about them, either their style or where their very specific strengths lie, that they're utterly unique. Now, I have my own theories as to why that is. I think part of it's because you're at your best when you kind of play intuitively. That's how I think the great players play. They train their intuition to know what choices to make to fit their style. Not necessarily the right choice for them. And they're able to express that in the game, and they play that particular style. And that's why their style is so individualistic to them. Whereas there are other players who have talent, or who have some level of skill, and they have some motivation, and maybe they just model their idea on what they think the metagame is like right now. How am I supposed to play? Or how does this great player play? Can I copy something he does? The greatest players, it's like they just in some way, the way they express themselves is just like a pure expression of the communication of the game. The game is like the language through which they speak. It's not that they're looking to copy this guy, or they're thinking, what could I do in this particular sense? Maybe in practice, they refine things about themselves, but I think they're best when they listen to themselves and they look at themselves honestly, their skills, and they try to just impress their skills into the world, manifest them into the game. That's the greatest players, and this is one of the areas where Shox, especially in CSGO, has had a huge effect. I mean, if I'm going to compare Shox to like a sporting star, usually, I usually go with the NBA, or maybe I'll go hockey sometimes, MMA. I think the person I would actually compare Shox with, and it'll seem like an easy, rather obvious comparison, would actually be Zidane, the footballer, Zinedine Zidane, because the thing about Zidane that made him one of the greatest players ever was, first of all, he wasn't a striker, and you'd normally think that it's going to be the striker who's the really great godlike player who scores all the goals, and that's all the kids, that's the ones they all want to be. But the thing about Zidane was, he could be the best player in the world despite not being a striker, despite not being this goal scorer, because he could do everything that could make his team the best, that could make his team win at any game. He could do absolutely everything, and not only could he do everything, but he did it in a way that's effortless. And when people say this is, you will often hear this about great sports stars. They'll say, oh, it's effortless what he does. Here's the key thing. I don't mean it's effortless as in it looks easy to do. I mean that when he does it, it looks as though like it's not taking any effort from him. It's not that it looks easy, it's that it doesn't look like it takes effort from him. It looks like when Zidane does a really great ball control trick and he goes past someone, it's never like he's almost going to lose control of the ball. He's kind of like a hot dog and he just keeps it on and he goes around and like, oh my God, well, I just kept control like a lot of really skilled young players might. It's like he moves as though he knew that the opponent would go there, and then he moves and he knows like, okay, I've got roughly this much, not knows consciously, but on some sort of intuitive level, he's feeling that flow of the game of this is where it's going to go and this is what I'm going to do. And as a result, he's just moving around and his effect is constantly this field is coming out from him where within this field, where when he's got the ball, anything can happen within this field and he's in total control of what happens there. And when players who are very good players, otherwise defenders, whatever, enter that field, it's like they get affected by his whatever he's extruding out of him, the way he plays, the decisions he makes, the skills he has, and crucially, the expert control he has over those. And that's the thing about Shox' style of play. Shox at his best, I feel a bit sorry for some of the people who've only come along now, because you will see glimpses, you'll see halves, and you'll see him within his now entry fragging role in Envy, sometimes have exceptional aim, exceptional wins and rounds, and games where he has 20 plus kills, and you think, wow, this is one of the best players ever, but you have to just see the guy who was in very games at the end of 2013, because that guy's level of control over the game, and his own skill set was utterly amazing. Aside from Get Right, to me, those two, at the moment, the other guys who've come along, Kenny S, Crims, listen, they're all wonderful players. They've had their periods that are very good, but they still got a ways to go if they want to match the level of these guys in terms of like the greatest ever, because Shox's level of control over the game meant that you could beat Shox's team. You could even kill Shox, obviously. You could win a 1v1 against him. You could win a round against him. But it was never going to be because he was out of control and he made a glaring mistake himself. He really had gotten to that sort of level where everything made sense. And if he lost the 1v3, he might get the first 2 kills in insane fashion where you're like, every time, you felt like every time he was in with a chance to win a 1v3. Every time he took a duel, it was at the right angle for him. I don't mean literally a right angle, the correct angle for him to be the right distance, the right sort of angle so that he'd have the better shot and or at least for his skill set, and be able to kill the opponent. Everything flowed around him. Wherever he moved around the map, that was really the key story when you were looking at the game. In the same way as if you watch Titan now, part of your mind has to constantly be on, same as for the opponent. Where is Kenny S? What is Kenny S doing? What is Kenny S going to do now? What will happen in 30 seconds to Kenny S' position? Because we know once he's dead, there's a massive chance you win that round. In the same sense, it's not that because Very Games was the best team, it's not that if you killed Shox it was over, but it's more like as long as Shox is still alive, we've got a trouble that at any point in this round we can still lose it all. He's really sick going in as the second man to clean up the kills, as the mid guy. He'll take apart 3v3s and 2-on-2s anytime, any day of the week. He'll just move around, take them anytime he wants. Left 1-on-1, he's deadly. He's got insane aim. He can just ace your whole team at any point if you rush his position. He was absolutely insane the level he was at. That's the thing as well. Not only was he a very consistently high skill level player, but his skill ceiling was through the roof. Like, for newer fans now, think of when Forrest has one of those games, like the Hellraisers game at DreamHack Winter, where it seems like no one can stand with him in the server. He can just run around, headshot everyone instantly. When they come to his position, he outskills them, outduels them, outmaneuvers them, like, uses better technique than them, has more precision on his first bullet. Think about Olaf M when he was in this DreamHack in this ESL1 Katowice tournament, where his entry fragging was utterly insane. His AK was out of this universe. When people are at that sort of skill ceiling level, and you think how much higher can they go? Shox's skill ceiling in that sense, I'll put it up there with Forrest, with anyone else. I think in terms of anyone in CS, the height of the skill ceiling was one of the highest you've ever seen. The guy can do everything. The guy can do anything. That's what we're talking about, the level of skill this person not only had, but could actually exert and on a regular basis into the game. And we don't see it as much now in the Envy team. And part of the reason why that is because of the fact that they shifted his role. Now he's not the middle guy going into the rounds. Now, because the skills spread out more, they tried to use him in a different sense. Now, initially, that wasn't really working. He was actually just doing okay, and he would have the occasional half, but in the big games, the big semis, the big finals, he wasn't having any of those Shox games. He wasn't having the game where he just dominates. He wasn't having games where that effect was there, where is he on the map? What is he going to do? If you're the opponent, and on your team, as long as he's still alive, as long as he's still there, we know we can win this. That's the thing about what I call the Shox effect. He's a player who's so good that if he's in the right positions and he's playing to the level that he's capable of, as in he's got that consistency down where he's going to bring these performances game in and game out no matter the map, then the effect that has on his team is that they never need to lack for confidence. If someone like Smiths gets nervous, or someone like Kiyoshima's not hitting his entry shots, in a world where Shox is playing at this level, there's no reason to have their confidence shaken, because, okay, I made a mistake here, but Shox is still alive. Shox is coming in now. There's going to be a 1v1 with Shox in a minute. Oh, look who he's against. Who can he be against where he's not favoured in a 1v1? It'll feel to them, because of what they've seen in practice and seen in big games, like, he can win this. I know he can win this. You know that feeling you get? This is the old joke we used to make about Nip, that unfortunately, when they were doing badly, Fiflaren used to get caught in all these 1v1s over and over. And if you're watching, it kind of felt depressing, because you were like, well, he's going to lose this one. Like, he's against Device now, and then he's against Dozier next. He's going to lose all these 1v1s. It's not going to happen. If Shox is in these 1v1s, now you're thinking, no matter what the odds almost, if he has just a Galil and no armor, and the other guy's a Colt and full armor and a grenade, you still feel like, nah, he's going to win this one. Like, it can happen. There's a way there. So it builds this inner confidence in his teammates, where in theory, that's the person they can rely on. If they can't rely on themselves, which would be the ideal, at least they can rely on this guy. They know he can do impossible things. They know he can get them out of trouble. They know that when they're doing well, he can be the battering ram that's just unstoppable and pushes them across the finish line. When they're getting worried and they need to grind those 2 rounds out, he's the guy who can ensure they do. That's always been the value of the real superstar. Not just the good player, not just a star player, the superstar who supersedes even the star player of the opponent. He's just the best. When that guy's in his zone, then his teammates can have confidence in him. And what's the effect on the opponent? Well, we know the intimidation factor. These players will all tell you in interviews, and some of them probably believe it because they've played scrims against each other, and they've all seen each other be fallible, and they've all seen each other have great games. But when they play against each other, especially if they play against each other a lot, like they do in CSGO, a lot of these pros will say like, oh, well, yeah, that guy's a really great player, but I'm not really that scared of him, you know. Like, if I play him, I think, yeah, whatever, it's just another really good player. I've played all the best players. Play against him, okay, I had a bad game today. Maybe he is better than me, but I'll play it out, we'll see. There's certain people, like Shox when he was at his prime, like Get Right when he was at his prime, Kenny S now, where it's like that quote by Olofmeister. I mean, Olofmeister at the moment, in terms of that last ESL 1 Katowice tournament, was probably the most effective player in the world in terms of the impact he was able to have in a game and win his team the tournament. Yet even he said in an interview, like, there's one player I'm scared of, is Kenny S. Because even he knows, like, you have to be aware of where that guy is at all times, what he's going to do. And you also have to be aware that sometimes, this is the scary thing if you're an elite level player and you have one of these guys in God mode, is that you eventually come to the realization after playing them in practice and in official games enough, like, even if I play my best absolute game, do everything right in terms of how I normally would feel in the game, I can still lose this game. I can lose this 1v1 to him, I can lose this half to him, I can lose this map to him, I can lose this series to him, I can lose this whole tournament to this guy, because he's at that level where he can go above what I can do. And it's very rare that these star players ever get to feel that, ever get to feel the intimidation that like lower level pros have to feel when they face even players below that, when they face like the Dignitas or the now TSM guys and they're just running over them and they can't get any entries as CT. Star players can get to feel like that and get that intimidation. And if you can intimidate star players, just look at what happens to JW sometimes when he goes against Kenny S. Or sometimes when he goes against Nip. He never has quite the same dominant impact that he has against Envy or against, if he was to play TSM, someone like that. Those players, you can see the confidence builds, it gets bigger, the piles up, and he just runs over them, and he feels like he can do anything, he can't be stopped, he knows there's no one on the opposing team when he's rolling that can be as good or better than him, and so he has the freedom to take all his shots. When he's playing Kenny S and Kenny S is picking him over and over again, or when he's playing Nip and they're winning all those 1v1s, and he knows the history of his team with theirs, and that he wanted to join their team maybe in the past, he maybe didn't think he was good enough, and this is Get Right and Forest and the history. Now it gets to him. The intimidation can intimidate even a star player to take him down a little bit of a level. That's another thing about all-time great players. Some of them aren't even skill-wise that much better than the other stars. But what can still make them gods is that their intimidation factor on even the other stars can take the other stars' level down while their level's still at the max level. It's the same quality that happens. I always used to notice this in Quake 1v1, but you see it in other sports as well. One of the qualities of a great godlike level player isn't just that they're godlike and they're incredible what they can do in the game. It's that naturally you almost would feel like everything just seems to go wrong for the opponent. The opponent always somehow plays worse against them. I always used to see this against the player MVP in StarCraft 2. It wasn't just that he made the right decisions. He had great read on the metagame. He had great strategies. He could execute them well. All of that was the case. But also other people would make these uncharacteristic mistakes and they would suddenly crumble under pressure against him and they would make this weird, bad decision there. I mean, in League of Legends, Froggen used to say this. He used to say that against me, the player Froggen in League of Legends, the mid laner, has this reputation that he's amazing at hitting skill shots. That's one of his things he's built his game on. To him, he never understood why people thought he was amazing at him. He used to just think, I don't know why, but opponents seem to just dodge worse against me. It's that sort of a thing. You're in their head at all times, and how good you are at the game somehow is constantly brought into reference point when they think of themselves, and it affects how they perceive themselves, and it makes them play worse. This is one of the qualities of great players that makes them so unbeatable in that sense. So the Shox effect, when it's at this level, can make a team that he plays for not unbeatable, but at their absolute best, the best they can be, not just from his play being the best it can be, being the best in the world sometimes, but in terms of the confidence it can instill in opponents, the fact that they won't crumble as long as he's around and he can still have impact on the game, the fact that opponents will start to play worse, will start to fear him in a sense, just a natural sense of how they think of themselves and how they think of their chances and what they're going to try and do in response. Like some players, when they play against a very great player, will play overly passive and they won't take the chances they normally do. That's one of the reasons why the TSM team always seems to struggle to choke, is that they get into situations where against other teams they just dominate them, run over them, be very aggressive, and suddenly they start taking passive angles that they wouldn't normally take, and they're taking away their own strengths by doing that. If you can get your opponent to take away his own strengths, he's going to be even easier to dominate, even easier to push down, hold down, and stop him from coming back. That's what a player like Shox can do, even though that's what's interesting is he hasn't always been able to do it within his team that he's in now, partly because they put him in this different role. With that said, as lackluster as he was early on in LDLC, we have started to see, especially it feels like over the last 2 to 3 months, he's really started to develop within this new role into a godlike player. He's not quite there yet. He's not at that player that Kenny Essence Crimson are consistently now, but he's getting there in terms of Shox the entry fragger, this new player. Shox the CT DOS 2 AWPer. He's getting this level up again. And so the match that really stands out to me was in the final of MLG X Games Aspen when they were playing against NiP, and NiP was having all these NiP magic rounds. They were having great games, and the maps were back and forth. On that second map, Inferno, that's when I first saw Shox in the LDLC Envy era first go into that Shox effect God mode. And not only was the effect he was having on his own game, that he was running in, entry fragging Forest, who's one of the best aimers, best holding that CT Inferno position in the world. He was killing him over and over and over. Then they had the effect on the rest of his team. Now Kiyoshima could hit every shot. Now every other player felt like it's easy for us to play this game. It's easy. We know we're going to get that kills there, and then once that kill's there, we're facing 4 guys, and now we run over this guy. Everything followed, not just from the kill itself, but the effect that it had on them. And then the opponents started to play in different positions. They start to move away. Forrest couldn't just be taking those 1v1 duels that he'd take from the pit like he always does, because if he did, he was going to get banged out. It wasn't going to work for him. Now they had to gamble sometimes on Banana to see if get information there, which normally isn't the NiP style as much. So what was interesting was the effect was having the effect was there in motion. You could see it rippling out through the map just as a result of what he was doing there. Then you go into Cobblestone, which was the deciding map, and he had this incredible first half where he really kept his team in it, and then once they got the roll going on CT side, then they could just bowl over NiP. But if he hadn't done that in the first half, if NiP had gotten those 12, 13, 14 rounds that could have happened without some of those godlike plays, would have never been a final. Would have been an easy third map. NiP would have taken the trophy. We'd all be saying, oh, great game on the Inferno map that you lost, and that would be it. But we saw what the Shox effect can do. Now, what I'm interested to see is how many more times will I see this? Will Shox be a player where I'm just talking about him like in the past? Like, you had to have seen him in like October 2013, it was godlike, the level was absolutely amazing, he could do this, he could do that. Will he ever truly become that player again? Will it now just be the era of Kenny S and Crims, and these are the players who are the gods, these are the players who are really at that elite level, and now Olofmeister may be joining that group? We don't know, but for his time and for his capabilities, when he's at his peak, Shox is something we've never seen in CSGO. He's utterly unique in terms of skills, his strengths, and the effect he can have both on his teammates and the opponent is something that other players can do it in a different way, but no one in the way that Shox can.